Hello, and welcome to UK Paranormal Files. Through the annals of history, people have seen unexplainable lights in the sky, the kinds of phenomenon that a modern day witness might describe as a UFO. In this episode, we shall simply take a look through a number of these historical accounts, as recorded via mainstream news sources of the day. A gentleman of South Molton, who wished his name not to be mentioned, called on me and related the accompanying story, writes our South Molton correspondent, which I took down in shorthand from his lips. I ought, perhaps, to mention that the gentleman in question is greatly respected and regarded as reliable. He is a teetotaler. I mention this because had he been under the influence of drink, it might possibly have had some bearing on the incident. The story is as follows. Last evening at about 9:45, I was walking home alone from Place Withheld. It had been raining heavily until 8 p.m, and the sky was still very cloudy, so that it was rather dark. When about 3 miles from South Molton, as I was walking along briskly, I heard on my right, a few feet ahead, a loud smack, as if someone had struck the muddy road violently with the palm of his hand. The sound was immediately repeated on my left. Then, from each side of the road, there seemed to start a stampede of dogs. The impression the sound gave me was that half a dozen heavy sheepdogs, or hounds, were rushing along in front of me at a great speed. After they had gone, what I should judge to be a couple of gunshots, the sound died away. I continued my journey for about a minute. Then, the same smack on either side of the road, and the sound of dogs' feet commenced again. It died away in the same manner as before. On coming up to the spot where it last ceased, it recurred in precisely the same fashion. Up till then, I had been merely puzzled. I am by no means a nervous man, and have walked hundreds of miles in the dark. But the third repetition of the unexplainable incident really made me feel uncomfortable. I felt that if my greatest enemy, if I had had one, came along at that moment, I should have been pleased to see him. I ruminated a few moments and wondered what I could do to solve the mystery, for I felt that if, as appeared to be the case, those invisible dogs meant to race in front of me for the rest of my walk, more than 2 miles, I could not stand it. There seemed, however, no alternative but to push along, so I resumed my walk. Guessing the spot where the sound of the dog's feet was last heard, I paused just before coming up to it, and kept my eyes on the road with the view of seeing whether I could detect any animal or object, but it was too dark. I could see nothing but blackness. Presently, however, out of the darkness, I observed a tiny speck of light appear in the hedge. I regarded it as steadily as I could, for I must confess my nerves were now really upset. Gradually it grew. The colour was bluish white, somewhat resembling an electric spark, and the light it gave out was brilliant and penetrating. It increased in size until it became as big as a football, a ball of white flame, flecked with bluish spots. I was still watching it, and I sweat as I've never done before, when it began to revolve and turn irregular somersaults, illuminating the road and bushes in a remarkable manner. A few seconds of this was all I could bear. I was feeling quite overcome. Pulling myself together, I shouted, "Get home!" The hideous-looking thing instantly vanished. I walked home without further incident. Ignis Fatuus? No, it could not have been that, because the road lay high and there are no marshes or wet ground within several hundred feet. My object in asking you to send this story to the Gazette is to ascertain, if possible, whether there is any explanation of the phenomena, or to know, at all events, if any reader has ever had a similar experience. I shall await the result with great interest. I may say, however, that I attach no actual importance to the affair. I am not in the least superstitious, but I have never had an uglier quarter of an hour in my life than during the time it was happening. I believe it was sufficient to unnerve anyone. It is related by an ancient historian that during a violent tempest in the year 1221, fiery dragons and flying spirits were seen in the air. In 1395, a still more wonderful phenomenon is said to have been observed. According to Holinshed, it seems that a certain thing appeared in the likeness of fire in many parts of England, now of one fashion, now of another, as it were every night, but yet in divers places all November and December. This fiery apparition, oftentimes when anybody went alone, it would go with him, and would stand still when he stood still. To some, it appeared in the likeness of a turning wheel burning. To others, some in the likeness of a barrel, flashing out flames of fire at the head. To others, some in the likeness of a long burning lance. And so, to divers folks, at divers times and seasons, it showed itself in divers forms and fashions a great part of winter. We have it on the same high authority that in the year 1459 there fell a bloody rain, whereof the red drops appeared in sheets, the which a woman had hanged out for to dry. Meteors. The Reverend E. Budge of Manican read an interesting communication on a meteorological appearance that recently occurred in his neighbourhood, the details of which he had from individuals on whose veracity he could rely. After a few introductory remarks, the Reverend gentleman says, "On the night of the 2nd of August last, an American vessel laden with timber was lying in the middle of Helford Harbour, just opposite Bossahan. About 9 o'clock at night, some persons who were stationed on the deck observed, at a short distance up the river, a strange-looking light, which was approaching towards them and which excited their surprise and became the subject of their conversation. Not leaving them, however, much time in suspense, the light rapidly drew nearer, and seemed to be coming with the wind, which was then blowing fresh down the river, attended by misty rain. In a very short interval after it was first observed, it passed by the vessel, at the distance of about 200 yards, presenting the appearance of a luminous body moving swiftly along over the surface of the water. On a nearer view, it had something of the aspect and size of a burning tar barrel, but seemed at one time to be almost double, or nearly divided in two parts. After passing the ship, it continued apparently to move on in a similar manner, and in just the same direction towards the open sea, continuing visibly for several minutes, and appearing in the distant horizon somewhat like the light of a steamer in the offing, or as one of the spectators observed, it bore much resemblance to the beacon light at St. Anthony Point. From the whole account, we may, I think, gather that the rate of its progress could not have been less than 30 miles per hour, and the distance over which this meteor travelled and was visible to the eye must have been at least 5 miles. The weather, it should be observed, during the previous day was of a very unsettled kind. At early morning there had been heavy rain. The afternoon was rather windy with showers, but no lightning or thunder was observed. Having communicated the above particulars to Mr. Snow Harris, who has lately published an exceedingly interesting work on thunderstorms, he has favoured me with a reply in which he says, "I consider the explanation of this phenomenon easy and a confirmation of my views of electrical action from the clouds, given in pages 36, 37 and 38 under the head Fireballs. And I have no doubt that the ball of light perceived progressed with the clouds and did somewhere terminate in violent disruptive discharge upon the principles explained and illustrated at page 36. As Mr. Harris's valuable work may not as yet be in general circulation, it will not perhaps be deemed superfluous if I observe here that he refers in these pages to a similar instance of a ball of light having been seen moving over the surface of the sea. In the account read at the Royal Society and recorded in the Philosophical Transactions, volume 47, page 366, the narrator states that, on November 4th, 1749, whilst taking an observation on the quarter-deck of the Montague, a 74-gun ship, one of the quartermasters requested him to look windward, upon which he observed a large ball of blue fire rolling along on the surface of the water as big as a millstone, at about 3 miles distance. Before they could raise the main tack, the ball had reached within 40 yards of the main chains, when it rose perpendicularly with a fearful explosion and shattered the main topmast in pieces. "90% of all alleged sightings of flying saucers can be quickly explained by perfectly mundane things such as space satellites, meteorological balloons, and even misidentification of the planets. The fact that we cannot positively identify the remaining 10% is due to the inaccuracy or paucity of the information supplied." This quotation from Mr. B. E. Robson of the Air Ministry, Whitehall, London, SW1, was sent in response to a reader of the Kensington News and West London Times, who had been intrigued by reports of a recent flying saucer incident in the Midlands. The Air Ministry statement sounds reassuring. Let us, however, survey the facts and see how officialdom's statement itself stands up to investigation. The early morning of February 9th, 1962 was dark and cold. Mr. Ronald Wildman of 43 St. Margaret's Avenue, Luton, Bedfordshire, is a Vauxhall delivery man. He takes new cars ordered by customers in the provinces to their destination. On that morning, he was on a routine journey to South Wales. He had started early in view of the distance of his journey and of the fact that a new car has to be run in slowly. His story can best be told in his own words. "I left home at 3 a.m. to proceed to Swansea with a new estate car from the factory. I had driven through Dunstable and was approaching the crossroads at the end of the deserted Ivinghoe Road at Aston Clinton, the time now being 3:30 a.m. approximately. Then I saw something. It was oval-shaped and white with black marks at regular intervals round it, which could have been portholes or air vents. It was about 20 or 30 feet above the ground and at least 40 feet wide across, which in my estimation was fantastic. As soon as I came within 20 yards at it, the power of my car changed. It dropped right down to 20 miles per hour. I changed down into second and put my foot flat on the accelerator. Nothing happened. I had my headlights full on, and although the engine lost revs, the lights did not fade. The object, which was silent, kept ahead of me by approximately 20 feet for 200 yards, then started to come lower. It continued like this till it came round to the end of the stretch. Then a white haze appeared around it, like a halo around the moon. It veered off to the right at a terrific speed and vanished. As it did so, it brushed particles of frost from the treetops onto my windscreen. It was definitely a solid object because the reflection from my headlights was thrown back from it. Mr. Wildman had never previously believed in flying saucers and had heard very little about them. His first reaction was one of shock. His second was to report the incident to the nearest authority. This happened to be the police station at Aylesbury. At first, the two policemen treated his story with incredulity, but after more than an hour's interrogation, they became convinced that Mr. Wildman was sane, sensible and sober. The police would not, of course, comment on what it was that Mr. Wildman saw. Mr. Wildman later mentioned that as an engineer, he was considerably impressed with the precision engineering that was obviously involved in the manufacture of the machine he claimed to have seen. Readers of the Kensington News and West London Times are free to make up their own minds as to what Mr. Wildman saw or did not see. What I would like to draw their attention to, however, is the attitude of the Air Ministry, which claims to investigate all such incidents very carefully, and to be able at the end of that investigation to explain them away satisfactorily. When Mr. Wildman was interviewed by special representatives of the Flying Saucer Review a day or two later, he was emphatic that no Air Ministry representative had even bothered to call upon him, and he was astounded when he learned what they had to say about the incident. The next morning, a national newspaper printed an explanation which the Air Ministry spokesman had given on the same day of the incident. It ran as follows. He may have seen a low cloud, lit up headlights, or it may have been a joke. What readers of that national newspaper were not told was that no Air Ministry representative had troubled to speak to Mr. Wildman at all. Their explanations were therefore pure guesswork, and they could give no possible opinion as to what Mr. Wildman had or had not seen, nor could they possibly decide whether the affair was or was not a joke. They did not even refer to Mr. Wildman's evidence. He, after all, had mentioned the fact that the object, whatever it was, had dislodged hoarfrost onto his windscreen. The police, who are experts in such interrogation, declared that he was telling the truth. The Air Ministry, therefore, in this instance did not even investigate before offering an explanation. In the process, they slandered both Mr. Wildman's competence and his integrity. If this is a fair example, and I maintain that it is, then both the opinions and statistics offered by the Air Ministry on this subject are worthless. What do you think of these articles? Do you think these are valid accounts of UFOs and alien encounters described as honestly and accurately as possible by these eyewitnesses and journalists? Or do you think that there are mundane and obvious explanations for each? Let me know in the comments section down below. If you've enjoyed this video, please also click the thumbs up button to show me and YouTube that you like this video. And if you think your friends and family might like this video too, why not give it a share by clicking one of the icons down below? It would be greatly appreciated too if you would go ahead and click the subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way YouTube will alert you the next time a regularly scheduled episode goes up on the channel. As always, all that's left for me to say is thanks very much for watching.